All right, let's dive in. Today, we're tackling something pretty interesting, something a lot of people might not think too deeply about: church membership.
Yeah.
We've got this source document, ABLF 15 members of a local church.pdf. And
Ah.
it's structured kind of like a study guide or a lesson plan about all the different roles and responsibilities within a church community.
Interesting.
So I'm really curious to get your expert take on this and hear what our listeners think too, especially if you've got any personal experiences with this whole church membership thing.
Yeah, it's true. We often hear that word church, and we don't really, stop to think of what it actually means.
Right.
But this deep dive, this is going to help us unpack some of those assumptions.
Yeah.
And right away, this document, it makes a distinction between the universal church, which is kind of like this massive global network of all believers, and then the local church, which is the specific congregation that you might actually be a part of. So have you ever considered that difference before? Like those two distinct layers to the idea of church?
You know what? I gotta be honest, I never really thought about it that way before reading this.
Yeah.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about just how many Christians there are all over the world, you
Right.
know?
It is.
But why would a study guide even bother to make that distinction? Like, what's the point of separating those two things?
Well, I think it's important to remember that throughout history, the way Christians have organized themselves has really varied a lot.
Hmm.
So, early Christians, they were facing persecution, right? They had to rely on these informal networks spread out across huge distances.
Right.
And the idea of a structured local church, like a central gathering place, they came a bit later.
Oh, okay.
So this document might be emphasizing that local aspect because it's focusing on the practical side of belonging to a specific community.
Okay, so it's more than just sharing the same beliefs. It's about actively taking part in a specific community, right?
Exactly.
And speaking of participation, this document, it lists these benefits of actually becoming a member of a local church. It talks about fellowship, learning, pastoral care.
Right.
I mean, those all sound great in theory, but I'm curious if they match up with your experience, in real life.
Uh-huh.
What's your take on why these things actually matter?
Well, I think these benefits, they go way beyond just the church.
Hmm.
You know, they're fundamental to how we work as humans. We crave connection, purpose, belonging, and a healthy church community can provide that. I think a lot of people out there, they long for these things without even realizing it.
Yeah, I know I've definitely been there. Like craving connection, but not even knowing what it was I was looking for.
Exactly.
And that brings us to what this source calls the 4 key responsibilities of church membership. And they use some strong language here. They really emphasize attending and participating, praying, giving material help, and doing works of service. It's almost like these are the pillars holding up this whole idea of belonging.
Yeah.
What's your initial reaction to seeing these 4 things grouped together like this?
I think it's interesting how the document connects these responsibilities, not just to, your individual spiritual growth, but also to the collective mission of the church.
Right.
It's like these actions, they're not just about personal piety, but they're about contributing to something much bigger.
Right. It's not just about what you get out of it. It's about giving back, too.
That's right.
Right.
Exactly.
So let's break down these responsibilities one by one.
Okay.
First up, we've got attending and participating. And this source doesn't mess around. They quote Hebrews 10:25. It says, "Let us not give up meeting together," really emphasizing that act of showing up and being engaged. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Is just being physically present enough, or is there something more to it?
I think the document's getting at this idea of mutual encouragement. It's not just about listening to a sermon or checking off a box,
Yeah.
Being together, it's supposed to strengthen and inspire the whole community.
Right.
Imagine a campfire.
Okay.
The more logs you add, the brighter and warmer it burns.
Right.
Each person's presence, each person's contribution, it adds to that collective energy.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
And it even goes further, saying that negative spiritual forces will actually try to prevent you from attending because they know how powerful it is. Okay, that's a little intense for me.
Yeah.
But beyond just showing up, what does active participation actually look like in this context? I'm curious to hear what you think. But the document does give us some concrete examples.
Okay.
It talks about singing with joy, praying with others, and really listening during the sermon. What jumps out at you from that list?
I think it's fascinating how they weave together the inward and outward aspects of participation.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, you've got that individual focus, like listening, reflecting, absorbing the teachings. But then there's also that outward focus, like contributing to the music, praying for other people, welcoming newcomers.
Right.
It's like this beautiful image of a community where everyone's both receiving and giving at the same time.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, next up is prayer.
Okay.
Something we all know is important.
Right.
But this source connects it directly to what it calls spiritual warfare. It quotes Ephesians 6.1 head. It says, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms."
Why?
And then it urges us to be alert and pray constantly for everyone in the church. To be honest, this part makes me a little uncomfortable. What does that even mean in practical sense?
To understand that, I think we have to consider the bigger picture, right?
Okay.
So for those who believe in a spiritual realm, prayer becomes more than just personal requests. It becomes a way to actively align your will with what you believe to be God's plan for the community and for the world, and to combat forces working against that plan. It's a call to spiritual action, not just personal reflection.
So it's less about like asking for things and more about a kind of active resistance or protection.
Exactly. It's about partnering with a higher power to overcome obstacles and achieve a shared goal.
Okay, that makes a little more sense. The document even provides a pretty detailed list of things to pray for, like the church leadership, the members spreading the message, and the church being a positive force in the community. It's clear they see prayer as the fuel that drives everything the church does. Now, for something a little more down to earth, giving material help, I guess this is no surprise, right?
Sure.
Churches need money to function, to support their work, and help people in need.
It's more than just keeping the lights on, though.
Right.
This document, it uses a quote from 1 Corinthians 16.2 that suggests giving on the first day of every week. Each one of you should set aside a sum of money in keeping with his income, saving it up, so that when I come, no collections will have to be made. And that's a very different approach than just saying give money.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this idea of proportionate giving? Does that resonate with you at all?
Yeah, I've always struggled with the idea of like tithing, giving a set percentage of your income.
Yeah.
It always just felt so obligatory.
Right.
But this approach, it feels different. Like it's more about the heart behind the giving, not just the amount.
Exactly. The document even compares someone who earns a lot but gives a little with someone who earns less but gives a proportionally larger amount.
Right.
The point is clear. It's not about the absolute amount. It's about the motivation behind it.
It's like they're trying to shift the focus from obligation to generosity, which I appreciate. And it ties back to that interconnectedness we talked about earlier, right?
Exactly.
Giving financially is a tangible way to participate in the mission of the church, to support its work, and to enable it to be a blessing to others. Speaking of contributing, let's move on to the last responsibility, works of service. This one really excites me because it goes way beyond those traditional roles we usually think about.
You're right. The document really emphasizes that every believer, no matter their skills or background, has something to offer. It quotes Ephesians 4.1, which describes how so Christ himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, and teachers to equip his people for works of service so that the body of Christ may be built up.
Right.
It's not just about pastors or preachers. It's about everyone using their unique talents to contribute. What stands out to you about this passage?
What strikes me is how it reframes ministry. It's not just about like specific positions or titles, but about living out your faith through your actions, you know? And it also challenges me to think like how can I best use my skills to benefit the community?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the document encourages you to really think about it. It suggests writing down your abilities and brainstorming with someone about how those abilities could be used to serve. It's like a call to action. It wants you to get involved and make a difference.
And it's not just about like being a Sunday school teacher or leading a youth group. They mention things like carpentry, plumbing, secretarial work, even flower arranging.
Right.
Like anything you can do.
It's about recognizing that every contribution, no matter how, like, seemingly small, can strengthen the community.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like each person is a different part of the body.
Right.
And all the
Yeah.
parts are needed for the body to function properly.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here with these 4 responsibilities. Attending and participating, praying, giving material help, and doing works of service. It's quite a comprehensive framework for what it means to be an active member of a church.
It is. And before we move on, I think it's important to remember that this document, it presents a certain perspective, maybe even an idealized view of
Yeah.
church membership.
Right.
It's crucial to engage with these ideas critically and honestly.
Yeah, you're right. We shouldn't just accept everything we read without thinking it through.
Exactly.
So as we move forward, I want to encourage all of you listening to consider your own experiences and perspectives.
Yeah.
Does this framework resonate with you? Do you see areas where it falls short or maybe doesn't quite capture the complexities of real life church communities?
Exactly. Blind acceptance isn't helpful.
Right.
Instead, let's use this document as a starting point
Mhm.
for a deeper reflection and a thoughtful discussion.
I love it. All right, we'll be right back after a short break to continue our deep dive into church membership. Stay tuned. Welcome back. I hope you had some time to think about everything we talked about so far. I've been thinking a lot about those 4 responsibilities, like attending and participating, praying, giving material help, and works of service. But how does all of this actually play out in real world churches? Churches come in all shapes and sizes, so I'm guessing those responsibilities might look a little different depending on the context.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Like a church in a small town versus, like a mega church in a big city. They might have very different ways of actually living out those ideas.
Right, exactly. Like in a small rural church, I imagine it's much more hands-on.
Yeah.
Everyone's pitching in to keep things running, like cleaning the building, organizing potlucks, looking after those in need. The lines between church activities and just like community life, they might be totally blurred, which actually creates that sense of interdependence that the document talks about.
Exactly. It's less about formal structures and
Huh.
more about everyone contributing to the fabric of daily life.
Right, right. Whereas in a larger urban church, attending and participating might look completely different.
Yeah.
You might have like multiple services to choose from, specialized ministries for specific needs, and a more organized system for volunteering.
Right.
It could feel less like a close-knit family and more like a well-oiled machine, with different departments and areas of expertise.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Right, right.
Both models have their own strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah.
I think the key is finding a community where you feel comfortable participating and contributing your own unique gifts.
I'm also curious about how prayer might function differently in different settings.
Yeah, well, in some traditions, prayer is very personal and private.
Yeah.
While in others, it's much more of a communal experience.
Yeah.
With things like prayer chains, prayer meetings, even designated people who intercede for the congregation.
Yeah, I've even heard of churches that have like 247 prayer rooms where people can sign up for slots to pray throughout the day and night.
Wow.
It's fascinating how these practices reflect different interpretations of that idea of spiritual warfare that we talked about, right? Some folks might feel more comfortable with a quieter, more contemplative approach, while others might thrive in a more expressive collective setting.
Yeah, and when it comes to giving material help, you'll find a whole range of approaches too.
Right.
Some churches really emphasize tithing, like giving a specific percentage of your income, while others they encourage a more free will offering approach.
Yeah, I remember when I first encountered that concept of tithing, it felt so overwhelming. I was a broke college student at the time, and the idea of giving away a fixed percentage of my meager income it felt impossible. But over time, I've come to appreciate the idea of giving proportionally as a way of acknowledging that everything we have ultimately comes from a source beyond ourselves.
It's about finding a balance that feels both meaningful and sustainable.
Right.
And the way that giving is actually practiced That can vary a lot too. You might have online giving platforms, special collections for specific projects, or even, auctions and fundraisers to support the church's mission.
Right. And the ways that people contribute through works of service can be incredibly diverse too.
Oh, yeah.
It's not just about those traditional roles like teaching Sunday school or leading a youth group.
Uh-huh.
It could involve using like practical skills like carpentry or plumbing, visiting the sick, organizing outreach events, or even just offering a listening ear to someone going through a difficult time.
Absolutely. Sometimes the most impactful acts of service are those like behind the scenes efforts that often go unnoticed. The people who set up chairs, clean the bathrooms, prepare the communion elements.
Right.
These acts of service, they might not be glamorous, but they're essential for creating a welcoming and functional environment.
You're so right. It's a good reminder that every contribution, big or small, visible or behind the scenes, it's all valuable.
Yeah. And I think that brings us back to the heart of the document we're exploring.
Mhm.
While it might present a somewhat idealized view of church membership, it does capture the essence of what it means to be part of a community where everyone is called to contribute and to care for one another.
Right.
It's about finding ways to use your unique gifts and talents to support the well-being of the whole.
And it's not just about what you get out of it, but how your actions impact the lives of other people, right?
Exactly.
It's about creating a space where everyone feels valued, supported, and empowered to live out their faith in a way that feels authentic to them.
Exactly. It's a beautiful vision, isn't it? And even though the document focuses specifically on the local church, I think a lot of these principles apply to any kind of community or organization where people come together for a common purpose.
I agree. Whether it's a church, a club, a volunteer group, or even a workplace, we thrive when we feel like we're a part of something larger than ourselves, contributing our talents and working towards a shared goal.
Hmm.
So even if you're not religious or haven't had a positive experience with organized religion, there's still a lot to be learned from this idea of active participation and giving back.
I'm glad you brought that up because it's important to remember that not everyone has had a good experience with churches or other religious institutions.
That's true, and it's important to acknowledge those experiences and the very real harm that has been done in the name of religion.
Absolutely, but I think there's also a lot of beauty and wisdom in the concept of community, of coming together to support and care for one another, and of using our unique gifts to make the world a better place.
Right.
And those values, those transcend any specific religious tradition.
So true. This deep dive has definitely given me a lot to chew on.
Yeah.
It's made me realize that the concept of membership, it's more than just a label or a formality.
Right.
It's about actively choosing to be a part of something, to invest your time, your energy, your resources, and to contribute to the well-being of the whole.
And it's a journey, not a destination.
Yeah.
There will be times when we feel more connected and engaged, and times when we might feel distant or disillusioned.
Right.
But the key is to keep coming back to the core values that drew us to the community in the first place, to keep seeking ways to grow and contribute, and to remember that we're all in this together.
Beautifully said. This deep dive has been incredibly insightful. We've unpacked the nuances of the universal and local church, explored those 4 key responsibilities of church membership, considered how those principles might look different in various real-world contexts, and even touched on the importance of critical thinking and personal experience.
And I think now as we wrap up this part, it's time for a final provocative question for our listeners.
Okay.
This wasn't explicitly addressed in the source material, but I think it's a perfect way to bring everything together and encourage further reflection.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's the question?
If you could design your ideal community, what would it look like? How would these responsibilities, attending and participating, praying, giving material help, and doing works of service, how would those play out in that ideal setting?
Whoa. That's a pretty powerful question. It's like taking all the stuff we've learned and using it to like dream up the perfect community, you know? So listeners, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to encourage you to really sit with that question. Imagine a community where everyone feels valued and empowered to contribute, where you feel a deep connection to the teachings, where giving is just this natural expression of of gratitude and where service is a joyful act of love.
Yeah.
What would that look like for you?
I love how you phrase that, a joyful act of love. It
Yeah.
really gets to the core of what makes a community truly special.
Right. It's not just about like fulfilling obligations or following rules. It's about finding a place where you can just be yourself, your authentic self, and contribute in a way that feels meaningful to you. So as you're envisioning this ideal community, think about the details. What's the atmosphere like? What kind of activities or events are happening? How do people interact with each other?
And don't be afraid to think outside the box. Maybe your ideal community isn't a traditional church setting at all.
Hmm.
Perhaps it's a blend of different traditions, or maybe it's a completely secular organization that embodies those same values of service, generosity, and mutual support.
That's such an important point. This whole conversation about church membership it means to belong, you know?
Yeah.
It's not about fitting into a predefined mold, but about finding a place where you can grow, connect, and contribute in a way that just aligns with your values.
And sometimes the act of just imagining something ideal, that can be the catalyst for actually creating it.
Mm.
Maybe your vision will inspire you to start something new, to seek out a community that already embodies those values, or to work towards transforming an existing community into something even more extraordinary.
This deep dive has been such a journey. We explored the historical and theological background of church membership, delved into those four key responsibilities, examined how they might look in different real world settings, and even challenged ourselves to think critically and imagine something better.
It's been a pleasure exploring this topic with you, and I hope our listeners are walking away with a renewed sense of possibility and a deeper understanding of what it truly means to belong.
Me too. But the conversation doesn't end here. This is just the beginning of your exploration. Take what you've learned, keep asking questions, and keep seeking out those communities that nourish your soul and inspire you to live a life of purpose and service. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time.